Welcome to the Business of Widows, real stories of grief, grace, and God's goodness. I'm your host, Abigail Peterson, and this is a special space for those who are walking through the unimaginable. Here we share honest, unfiltered conversations with widows and widowers who have lived through deep loss, yet have encountered God's presence in the middle of their pain. Each episode reminds you that your grief is real, your story matters, and you are not alone. So take a deep breath, come as you are, and join us as we explore heartbreak, healing, holy moments, and the unexpected goodness of God, one story at a time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Business of Widows podcast and episode number 3. Today, I have a very special guest joining me, someone I've admired for many years, and I know many of you have as well. I followed this beautiful woman for a long time, and she has a gift for making people laugh through her hilarious storytelling and contagious passion for life. Well, I could talk about her all day long. I think it's best to just let her introduce herself and tell us about her story. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sister Peterson. It's my honor to be here. And I first of all want to say that I think this podcast is a fabulous idea. And so thank you for letting me be one of your first guests here. I'm very honored. My name is Kathy Copeland, and I live in a cute little town called Beaufort, Georgia. And let's see, I don't know a lot to say about myself. I'm a mom of 4 grown sons. I have 5 grandchildren and 1 on the way. And I'm just a very blessed woman. And I hope I can be a blessing or a help to somebody here today discussing the business of widows.
And you have been a blessing without even knowing it. Because like I said, I've followed you for many years on your Instagram and your little shopping little excursions you've been on, and then after the passing of Brother Copeland, watching you go through your process, not knowing that I would be going through my own, and just watching you do it with dignity and as a Proverbs lady. And I just appreciate that so much. And I'm just so grateful that you can join, because I know that you have so much wisdom to share. So thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you.
So what would you like to share about Brother Copeland? Some things, I never had an opportunity to hear him preach, just on Holy Ghost Radio and of course, social media, little clips that are out there here and there. But I would love to hear more about Brother Copeland and your love story and whatever you'd like to share with us today.
All right. I'd love to do that. I will have to cut out a whole bunch of wonderful, juicy details, though, because there's just so much to our love story and to the way God brought us together. And then also just to share some things about my husband. But I'm actually a convert of my husband's. He was preaching a revival in Denver, Colorado, where I'm from, when I came up for the first time in my life, or actually second time in my life, to pray. I had prayed one time when I was about 10 years old as a kid, and prayed that, if God was real, would he show himself to me. And then this time later, as an almost 18-year-old young lady, coming and praying at the altar. And that morning, I received the gift of the Holy Ghost. I was baptized, all rolled into one Sunday morning. But my husband was the evangelist preaching that morning. So he always liked to give me a hard time about it years later, that he was my husband and he was my father in the Lord. So, I had to do what he said. That kind of thing. But one of the many neat things that God did for us is that morning, I was the first one to the altar, and my husband, when people were praying, of course, he was going around praying with people and everything towards the end of the service, but he sat down in the second row, the second pew, and God told him that I was going to be his wife. And it was kind of a crazy deal, because I'm not from a Christian home. Nobody in my family serves the Lord, even to this day, unfortunately, but I'm still believing God for miracles for my family. But he felt it so strongly, he went and told the pastor. Of course, I didn't know this until years later, but he told the pastor, said, I want you to raise her up right, because I'm going to come back in a few years and marry her. Wow. And that's, in a nutshell, that's exactly what he did. He came back 2.5 years later, and I didn't know I would ever see him again. I didn't know anything about church, about ministers, about the Bible, nothing. But I started my journey with the Lord that morning, and then I was in high school, senior in high school, and that was another one of the reasons he wanted to wait a few years before he came back. But and then I started college and lived in the dorm there a few miles from the church. I would ride my bike to church. It was my only form of transportation. So I'd ride it, in Denver, it snows a lot. So I'd ride it over the ice and everything. But I got, really involved in church and going to Bible studies and all that good stuff. But I'm getting sidetracked. But basically my husband called, well, he called the pastor several times throughout those two and a half years just to check on me. He said, "How's Kathy doing?" And the pastor said, Brother Hale was my pastor. Billy Hale is a wonderful man of God. He's still living and preaching the gospel. But he said, "Well, she's doing good, brother. She's teaching Sunday school now, or she's joined the choir, that kind of thing." And so then Brother Hale called my husband and said, "I want you to come back for revival." This is about little over 2 years later. And so Tim, my husband, said, "Well, I would love to. How's Kathy doing?" And my pastor said, "Well, she's doing great, but she's engaged."
Oh my, this is a twist I didn't know
Yeah,
about.
a lot of people don't know it. I don't talk about it a lot, but I had become engaged to a young man in the church there. He was, a wonderful guy and served the Lord with his whole heart and all that. But we weren't the right ones for each other.
Mhm.
But I had been told that we were. People were telling me, "Oh, it's a will of God, this and that," and I didn't know.
Mhm.
And so that's why I really discourage anybody from ever telling somebody this is a will of God to marry somebody. But anyway, skip a lot of details. My husband said, "Well, so she's engaged, not married." And Brother Hale said, "Yeah." And my husband said, "Okay, I'll come for revival."
That's pretty bold.
Yeah. And so he came, and I was late the first night of revival because I had an exam that night, actually, for whatever reason. It was that night at college. And I got in late, sat in the back row, and saw this gentleman's preacher. And I knew that he was the one for me. I knew he was going to be my husband. So there's a lot that transpired, and that basically God just worked it out every step of the way for us. But I just knew as soon as I saw him, I knew that he was the right one for me, and I loved him, and I saw that he was, just such a good man and a humble man and all those things. And I'm just so grateful that God worked it out for us. We were married about 4 months after that, 4 months after that, which
Wow.
again, I don't recommend that for everybody, but it worked. It fit for us. And we had a wonderful life together. We were married for 40 years. We traveled for 11 years evangelizing. My husband had been an evangelist for 10 years before that. And then we came to this little town of Beaufort, Georgia, and fell in love with the people and all that, and started pastoring a little work there. And it just kind of went from there. We had 4 sons, raised them here in Georgia, and just, I don't know, I guess I'm sort of rambling now, but Tim Copeland was a wonderful, wonderful husband. He was so much fun to be with, and he was so kind, and he had such a heart for people. I mean, that's why people loved him, in our church and just in the whole, there are people now there's people that I don't even know if they've ever even been to our church, but yet they called him their preacher, their pastor, because he had a lot of compassion, and he loved to visit people and to be with them and to be there for them. He got up every single morning and headed straight to the church and had his own, devotional time and prayer and Bible reading and all that study. But then he would head on out and hit the streets and go visit people in the hospitals and the nursing homes and just walk around the neighborhood. That's just the kind of guy he was. And he was an awesome dad to our boys and a wonderful husband. I don't know what else I can say. I can say a whole bunch more, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. And then I don't know if now's the time to say it or later. I guess now. In 2019, he was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. And of course, obviously, we had known there were problems before that. We were seeking answers and went to a lot of different doctors and just a lot of different people. And we tried a lot of different things. But I kind of knew around the time of us going to one of the top neurologists in the country to have him, have them examine him, do a brain scan and all that kind of stuff. I was pretty sure by that time that it was something to do with dementia, unfortunately. But so from the time of his diagnosis, November of 2019, to when he passed, which was May 13th, 2023, it was about 3.5 years. So, and it was, as you can imagine, it was a nightmare because, I mean, any form of dementia is a nightmare, but this particular type of dementia called frontotemporal dementia, which is actually easier to diagnose than some of the others, even than Alzheimer's, because with frontotemporal dementia, the front and the side lobes of the brain actually shrink. Like with Alzheimer's, it kind of starts more towards the back, or the side with the pituitary gland, but frontotemporal is the front. And it's, it's the craziest thing because when I started reading about it, I just couldn't believe it because it would talk about where, all the different parts of our brain house different parts of our character and our being and who we are and what makes us who we are and all that. But the frontal lobe has to do with compassion and empathy. And I couldn't believe that I was like reading these clinical studies about the brain and it kept talking about compassion and empathy. I'm like, I didn't even know that was really part of the brain. Like I thought that was just somebody's personality. But it's not. We actually have a part of our brain, that section that helps us to be more to be compassionate and empathetic. Well, those are the things that he had in great excess. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it was shrinking. And so it was quite a deal to go through. But
so what do you remember after Brother Copeland passed away? What do you remember about those early days of grief? And I've done a little bit of research over the last little while and talked about anticipatory grief. And
yes.
when you went through a illness like Brother Copeland, it's that anticipatory grief. And so I would love for you to just share about those early days, and then if you had anticipatory grief.
Yes, I've read about that as well. And then there's another term or a similar term called ambiguous loss, and it's just kind of the formal term, I guess, for when you grieve the loss of someone that's still there physically. Which again is, I think those two terms are interchangeable. The anticipatory, because it's kind of like what's coming. It's only getting worse, really. Mm-hmm. But the ambiguous loss is just you've lost that person, but not physically. You've lost them emotionally and cognitively. And so, in a way, when you have someone with that type of illness or with any extended form of illness, cancer, or anything like that, it's really like you lose them twice. Like mm-hmm. You lose them, and then you lose them mentally and emotionally, and then you lose them physically. So, that's not to say that when someone we can never compare grief with anyone else's grief. Everyone's grief is their own journey, their own loss, and we have to navigate it the best way we can. So I don't know, that it's necessarily not better or worse. I can't even use that term with loss, but easier or harder to lose somebody that way or to lose them instantly. They both carry, great weight with them, obviously. But that's when my grief started, is what I'm saying. It didn't start when he passed away. It started when he started getting sick, and especially when I realized what it really was. I remember that one of Tim's biggest fears when he knew what he had, although he never wanted to really talk about what it was. And that's a whole nother story in itself. But I kind of wanted to share this. I've never actually shared this with anybody. Nobody knows this except my kids, but I think it might help somebody. But when we, after he'd had hours and hours and several days over several weeks of being tested by neurologist, neuropsychologist, a neurosurgeon, all this kind of stuff, then we had an appointment that next morning. Well, actually, this morning I'm talking about, to go back for the official, diagnosis, whatever. And my strong, wonderful husband broke down sobbing and said, "Please don't make me go."
Mm.
And of course, I started crying, and I said, "You've got to go. We have to go. We've got to figure this out. We've got." But we both knew, but we didn't want to come out and say it. And so I called my eldest son, Jordan, who sometimes when my husband would, get to, especially in those next few years when the disease would just make him do some crazy things,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes he, wouldn't listen to me. I couldn't control the situation, but sometimes he would listen to Jordan when he wouldn't listen to anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but even in those early days when we were having some problems, Jordan was usually the one that would help out. So anyway, long story short, I called Jordan sobbing and I said, "We need to get your dad to the doctor. We have to go to the appointment. He doesn't want to go. He needs to go. We've got to find out what it is, blah, blah, blah." And instead of him doing what I expected him to do and wanted him to do, which was say, "Dad, you've got to get in that car," he said, "Mom, we're not going to
Mm-hmm.
make Dad go if Dad doesn't want to go." And I'm like almost hysterical. I'm like, "What are you talking about? We've got to, if he's got what I think he does, he needs to be able to say goodbye to you boys. He needs to be able, it's on and on." And he said, "Mom, this is not your journey. This is Dad's journey. And he's going to make the decisions that he wants to make on this. And he's still able to make these decisions. So we're going to let him make that." So, and I'm just sharing that to to encourage women that have lost spouses or men that have lost their spouse, or maybe in the process of losing them. There's a lot of letting go that we have to make ourselves do, and we don't want to. But we
Mm-hmm.
have to, and we have to allow them the choice to go how and when and at what rate they want to go, if that makes any sense. So I don't know. I learned a lot that day. And anyway, thankfully my son and I were able to go to the doctor, and not thankfully, it's not that we wanted to go hear the news, but we went and heard the diagnosis, and my son told the doctor, I'll always remember this. He said, we set our faith down outside the door when we came in here because we want to listen to everything you're saying and hear the facts, see the
Mm-hmm.
brain scans. He said, but when we walk out of the door, we're picking up our faith. And that
Wow.
that image really helped me in the next, a few years after that, because I kept thinking, no, we picked up our faith again, even if God's not doing it like we wanted him to, and he didn't do like we
Right.
wanted, but still we had and still have the faith that God knew, God knows he knows the beginning from the end. And so he orders our steps, and so that helped me to trust in him. But mostly I would say the hardest part of my early days of grief would just be losing Tim, just piece by piece. Just
Mm-hmm.
his greatest fear was forgetting the names of his sons. And he would walk around the house so many times in those early months and say, "Jordan, Caleb, Benjamin, Clark. Jordan, Caleb, Benjamin, Clark."
Mm-hmm.
And then it got to where he would need me to remind him or give him little hints. And then it got to be where no matter how many hints I gave him, he couldn't, remember their names. Of course, he always knew who they were when they walked in the room. His whole face would light up. But that was hard. And hearing him play the piano, going from being an incredible pianist to not even being able to pick out chords. It was just, man, it was a heartbreaker. So those were my early days of grief, just losing him one piece at a time, one day at a time. It was horrible.
And this is one of the things that it almost kind of sounds demented, but as going through the losses that I've gone through, I have always thought about, well, what would be worse? Would it be worse to watch somebody go through, a long illness and knowing that they're going to pass away,
Mhm.
or just having a tragedy?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I've had both. My
Yes.
mom was diagnosed with liver cancer and had a very short illness, 3.5 months. And so I was a part of that and watched as the illness took life from her.
Mhm.
And then, of course, my husband was tragically killed. And I came to realize that it doesn't matter. It's tragic. Either one is tragic. They both
Exactly.
have elements of, you get more time with somebody who's going through an illness, but sometimes that's not always a happy time, you
No, it's
know?
not.
And so I've just learned to say, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh
Take
away.
away. Blessed
Blessed
be the
be the name
name
of the
of the
Lord.
Lord. Absolutely.
Now, Sister Copeland, one thing that I wasn't a pastor's wife, but I often think of you and other pastors' wives that I know that when they lost their spouse, their husband, it changes your role. Not only are you have you lost your spouse, but that affects, your position in the church. And
Yeah.
so, how how would you describe and how would you share how widowhood changed your identity, just in general, but then also with you as the pastor's wife?
Yeah. I think I'm maybe a little different than the average pastor's wife in that area. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but it seemed from my experience and the friends of mine that have gone through it. I feel like I never did and haven't lost my identity. I'm a little bit different. Maybe I think I'm a little more fragile emotionally. Not that I go to pieces, but I'm just a little more. I used to be, tough. I can handle it, whatever. And now I had several years when my husband was sick of just horrible anxieties that came on me, and I never was that kind of person either. And it was bad. And that kind of changed me. But as far as my actual identity, I don't know. I know it is tough, especially for anyone in the ministry. I mean, we had been full time, pastor and pastor's wife for 29 years when he got sick.
Wow.
Um, but I guess because maybe because I never found, my identity wasn't being a pastor's wife, I guess. I loved it and I appreciated it. I did the best that I could, but I never had looked to be that or asked to be that or, my role, I feel like my God-given role was and still is to some extent being a mom. And
Hmm.
so I haven't lost that. Um, I know that there are a lot of pastors' wives, they do lose their identity, and not just in death, but even just when the pastor retires.
Right.
It's tough. And I mean, I'm not saying it's all been a bed of roses, it's tough. I mean, I was the one in charge of so many things and I answered the questions and I, put together the whatever needed to be done, the marriage retreats and the banquets, and all of a sudden I'm not in charge of anything.
Hmm.
Now I am again now, but I'm just talking about that interim period. But that was of course by choice because I wanted to be there to take care of my husband. So I think I'm really blessed in that way because I haven't had any sort of identity crisis. I'm still who I am, so I haven't had to really deal with that maybe like some women have.
So I shared on my podcast last week about not having any knowledge of the car things. Anything that had to do with our cars, Jeremy always took care of. And learning how to navigate, taking care of the car registrations, taking care of the car maintenance, all of those little things. What is something that you've had to learn how to do on your own since Brother Copeland has passed?
The car maintenance. I listened to that episode earlier today when I was driving down the road. It was so good. I mean, the second one that you interviewed your friend.
Uh-huh.
And I just was like shaking, nodding my head. I was like, yep, the same thing. Because I was spoiled. Tim spoiled me. I mean, yes, I've had to learn to get the oil changed. And of course, I have boys that'll do it for me, but I've wanted to do this on my own. I don't want to, be the one to call, honey, can you do this? Can you do that?
Right.
And sometimes I'm sure I still do for some things. But of course, I had to learn to pay all the bills, the property tax, get everything together for income tax, all that kind of stuff. I didn't have to do any of that. And actually, none of my boys, until they got married and left the house, they didn't have to get the oil changed in their car because my husband, he he just loved to do stuff like that. He would get my keys and he would say, do you need your van for a few hours, or my Suburban, whatever I had at the time? And I'm like, no. He said, okay, I'm going to go take care of it. So I'd get the oil changed, and he would take it through this really nice car wash that we had in town and take it through there and bring it back to me. Then he'd come in, and whichever boy was around, Benjamin, give me your keys. Have you got a few hours where you won't need it? No, Dad, you don't need to do that. I'll take care of it. Dad. No, give me your keys. And so he would take Benjamin's car or Clark's car, whoever was there, and get the oil change if it needed it, get it washed and vacuumed, and, just really sweet. So that's just stuff you don't think about it when you're a spoiled wife and your husband handles all that for you. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, look at all these bills that are due. And
Mm-hmm.
another thing, this is really silly, but I would think most wives could relate to this, but another thing that I never thought about, but like, I don't have anybody anymore, like to tell me if I've got some piece of fuzz on the back of my skirt, or like a long hair stuff on my jacket. I mean, when we'd get ready for church, we'd get ready, and then right before he'd go out the door, how'd I look? I'd, make sure everything is tied straight. And then I'd turn around, let him, and he's like, oh, you got this sweater's fuzzy, or, whatever, that kind of thing. I mean, I don't have anybody to do that anymore. I don't even have anybody, like, after a really good altar call when everybody's been praying and crying and blowing their nose in the Kleenex. And then I would go up to my husband, like, flare my nostrils and like, do I look okay? Is my nose clean? I mean, I'm just being brutally honest here. And I mean, I can't do that to someone in our church. I don't even want to do it to my kids because they'd be like, Mom, but I mean, they probably would help me. But so it's just, and another thing, this is a little thing, but I never thought about this until several months after Tim had actually passed away. But is he always used to tell me, how pretty I was, which I don't feel that I am, but he always did. So, and he just say, and I do know a lot of husbands don't do this, and they
Mhm.
really should, but he always made me feel so pretty. He would notice when I had on just a new dress, or fix my hair a little different. He was just always complimenting me. And
Mhm.
it was a few months after he'd passed away, and I stood there, and I think I'd just gotten dressed for church, and it suddenly hit me. I'm never going to hear anybody tell me I'm pretty. I mean, my grandkids,
Yes.
Mom, Grandma, you're so pretty, but I'm their grandma. I give them candy, they're going to
Right.
tell me I'm pretty. And, sometimes like teenage girls at the church, oh, you look so cute, Sister Copeland, whatever. But I'm just talking about, I realized I had lost that in my life, that extra boost of confidence and that little burst of love that he would give me, it's gone. And so those are just some of the things that I've learned to live without, I guess.
And those are some of the hardest. Those are
Yeah,
some of the hardest to
absolutely.
I mean, we can talk about the cars, and we can talk about the insurance, and we can talk about all these things, and we can navigate those. But I mean, I don't really enjoy standing in front of the mirror and complimenting myself.
No, although there would be nothing wrong with it, but
But speaking, I know that your boys are a big support to you, as well as your daughter-in-laws and people in the
yes.
church. So what are some of the types of support, or give us an example of some support that has helped you the most?
Well, just that right there, my kids being there for me. It's really not anything specific that I can think of, just them being there for me and knowing that, they suffered a loss too. It wasn't just me. Obviously, they lost their dad, and they were super, super close to their dad. And I do have to say that even though I never question God, like, why did you do this? Why did you? And I don't think there's a thing wrong with talking to God and questioning him, but I just never did. But the one thing that I guess in one sense it was a question, but I felt like maybe God had made a mistake, I guess, for lack of a better. I mean, that's terrible to say that, but I know God doesn't make mistakes. But I just kept feeling this. I just kept feeling that, my boys needed me growing up. They needed a mom to corral them and correct them and love them and be there for them and all that. Of course, they needed their dad too, without a doubt. But I just felt like now they're men, and I kept having this thought come to me, if one of us had to go, it really should have been me, because I feel like, and really honestly, I mean, I don't really think it's healthy to feel that way, but I actually still feel that way, that really, if one of us had to go, it should have been me, because I feel like they need their dad now more than they need their mom. I mean, they love me to death. I'm super close with my boys and my daughters-in-law. But I don't know. But the odd thing about it, even though I feel like they need their dad, I need them. I'm the one stuck here on earth, and I need my boys and my daughters and my grandkids. And they have just, I really don't. I would probably be a different person, and this whole thing would be a different story if it weren't for my kids. And like one of my grandsons, Luke, he was born 10 days after Tim passed away. 10 days. And that little guy has brought so much joy to my life. They all do. I mean, I just can't even tell you. So I have that. And, I've got some amazing friends too that have walked every step of this journey with me, and they have been such a blessing and strength. So I would say I'm very blessed in that department of support and things like that.
And speaking of things that have been a comfort to you, has there been any words of comfort that someone has said to you that you would advise other people to use with another widow or widower? Something that truly comforted you?
Or not to use.
Both. Let's share both.
Well, you know what? I think that's a great question, because I mean, there's whole books written on this, how to help people grieve, what to say, what not to say. I heard about this one guy that told somebody that had just lost a child, I believe. And they said, I know exactly how you feel, man. I just lost my dog 3 months ago. And, like, I read that. I'm like, but somebody actually did say that. Like, they compared losing their dog, which I love dogs. We had dogs here, but you can't compare that to losing a child. So I was like, oh my word. So I know there are some things you shouldn't say, but the way I feel about this is 99.9% of the time when somebody says something to a person who's grieving and who's had a loss, they're trying their best to comfort that person. It may come across wrong. It may be a little, rough around the edges, but it's still they're trying to be a comfort. So I'm not one to say, well, here, make sure you don't do this. Make sure. I mean, a lot of that I learned anyway, just being a pastor's wife, of what not to say. But I just don't like people feeling, and that's why sometimes people don't even come around when someone's lost somebody, or they don't come to the funeral. They don't know what to say. They're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. So, I just don't think people need to worry as much about that. They just need to be there and say, I love you. I'm praying for you. Give them a hug, whatever. But, so my husband, let me just say this. At my husband's funeral, he was a much loved man, as I've already said. There were over 1,200 people at his funeral, as well as 5,000 plus on Holy Ghost Radio. Since then, Brother Jeff Hoffer, who's over Holy Ghost Radio, told us he's had about 50,000, whatever you call them, listens or listeners, whatever, since then. On Facebook, I don't know. I don't even know how many people saw the funeral, but I do know, I just checked this afternoon. I do know that on YouTube, we have my husband's whole funeral on YouTube, and I checked today, and it has 24,000 people that have viewed it. So, And I'm saying all that not to, well, I mean, I like to brag on my husband, but all that many people. So you can imagine all the texts, all the cards, all the things that I received those first
Yes.
months and even year from people. And in all of them, I I don't know one that I would say, oh, they shouldn't have said that. They were all from the heart, and they might not have been worded perfectly. Of course, many of them were, because a lot of them were from, eloquent preachers and pastors' wives and things, but they were just from people all over, just, people in our town too. And I just think, man, when someone's trying, just accept it for what it is. And I didn't mean to go so long on this question, but there is one thing that one lady said to me. It's pretty funny, but we were at church, and it was not that many months before my husband passed away. He was in very, very bad shape, and he was in a care home at this time. And so I was at church that night and happened to be standing by this sister in our church. She's a fierce little lady, but she's real short, and she just speaks her mind. So, well, I'm in the service, and I'm feeling sorry for myself, because it was a terrible, situation we were in. And I think I'd had an extra hard day that day with my husband, whatever. And so I'm crying, and she said, are you okay? What is it? And I said, well, it's just my husband. And she looked up at me and said, everybody has problems.
Oh my.
And the funniest thing about it is, for whatever odd reason, that's exactly what I needed. Like, I did not even get offended. It shocked me for a second, and I just stood there like staring. And then I started thinking, like, you know what? Everybody does it. First I was thinking, a problem? You're calling my husband,
Right.
having this dementia a problem? And then I'm thinking, wait a minute, and I start looking around the church right there. My eyes are still wet with tears, and she's just standing there patting me on the back, not even realizing she said anything offensive, and thinking she's just said something encouraging, but it was encouraging. It was the weirdest thing. But I'm looking around, and I see a sister in our church that lost her son when he was 10 years old. Another
Mm.
sister in our church that lost a son at 20, I think he was 23, 24. I see widows. I saw widowers. I'm like, oh my word. We've got a church full of people with problems.
Right.
And so it was kind of what I needed that night. So anyway,
What
words
does
of comfort. Yeah.
what does trusting God look like on hard days for Sister Copeland?
Trusting God. It looks like putting one foot in front of the other foot and walking. It looks like going to church no matter what. Even if it's the last thing you feel like doing, you don't want to see people, you don't want to get out of your fuzzy pink robe. You got to go to church. It looks like praying.
Mhm.
It looks like not walking by our feelings, because I mean the bottom line is we walk by faith, not by
Mhm.
our feelings. And that doesn't change when we lose somebody. We still have to walk. We don't have an excuse even then not to walk by faith and not to trust God. It might be harder at times, but you still do it the same way. You still just keep on. You got to keep on keeping on.
So true. So true. I go back to my favorite verse. I will bless the Lord at all times, and his praise shall continually be in my
My
mouth.
mouth, that's
And
really,
I have been testifying with that verse for years. And when you look in the context of the verse, it doesn't say when you have a good day or
yeah,
only when things are on an upswing. It says at all
exactly.
times.
At
And
all
that's difficult
times.
to do on those
Yes, it
days
is.
when you come into the church after your spouse has passed away, that
Mhm.
first service,
Yeah,
that first time that you see somebody else leading songs or preaching.
right,
And
right.
so, but I just say, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name
Yeah,
of the Lord. I will bless the Lord
absolutely.
at all times. What advice would you give to a new widow? I'm a newish widow. It's been a year for me. So, what advice would you give to me? What advice would you give to somebody who's maybe walking through illness and could potentially be a widow, or somebody who is a new widow?
Um, First of all, I would say I'm so sorry for what you're going through, what you've been through. It's not cliche to say I'm so sorry for your loss, because we really are. We hurt for other people
Mm-hmm.
when they lose one that they love. I think I would encourage a new widow to just know that it really will get easier. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't really like using that word easier because that makes it sound like, like you're learning a new skill or something, which you actually are navigating widowhood. But it's not that it's easy, but it gets easier. Um, and I know some people say, they say time heals all wounds. Well, it doesn't heal all, and I can see both sides of that coin, but time can really do a lot. I would say navigate this in the way that you feel is best for you. So some people would say it's really good to get out. It's really important to be around people. Make yourself get out, and there's definitely some truth to that. But I would say as much as you can, especially in those early months and the early years, um, if you can, stay at home in your robe, eat nachos and ice
Mm-hmm.
cream, and just don't worry about it. Just don't feel guilty. Whatever you feel like doing, which most of the time is going to be nothing or crying, go ahead and do it. I mean, crying is very cathartic. I mean, obviously at some point you have to get up and do something with your life, but nobody there's not a pinpointed time for that. So I feel like you'll know when you're ready, and there's a reason that you're still here. I mean, God still has a plan for your life. He didn't make a mistake when he left you here. And so at some point it's time to get up. Not that you're forgetting or dishonoring or anything like that, the one you loved. You're honoring them by at some point going on with your life. You'd
Mm-hmm.
still have to go to church though now. You can't not go to church.
Right.
And you don't backslide because, God took the one you love the most. I mean, I never have understood that. Somebody, and I don't mean to sound callous, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean, somebody loses somebody every moment of the day. And it's only when it hits home that all of a sudden people are like, or, oh, my best friend, passed away or whatever. Well, that's terrible. It's horrible. But that you don't walk away from God because of that. We don't have an option there.
Right.
So I don't know. That's
Right.
what I'd say. It's going to get a little easier, and God still has a purpose for you. That's what I'd say.
I love that advice. I love that advice because I think when you're going through the depths of grief, sometimes you think, well, what does God have for my life?
Yeah.
You feel
Yeah.
lost, you feel
It's
incomplete,
natural. Yeah. To feel that.
and believing that God does have a purpose. And I talked to a widow a few weeks ago at a youth conference, and she shared something with me that has just stayed with me over the last few weeks. And one of the things that she said is she'd been married to her husband for 30 years, and he was killed in a tragic accident. And
Mhm.
she told me that, she had a lot of peace. And when she thought about it, she said, it's appointed unto man once to die, and after that, the resurrection. Everybody, God knows their timeline. God
Yeah.
knows their time frame, and I'm living, and so my timeline is still moving forward. And what am I going to do with that time that's left of my life? God still
That's
has a
so
plan
good.
for that.
Yeah. That
Well,
is so good.
yes, and I thought about that, and I thought, his life on earth and his work that he did here is complete, is finished, but mine is not. And so, whatever you can do, Lord, use me for whatever time I have left.
Yeah, and that's
And so,
exactly what widows need to hear. I think you said it better than I did. That's really good. And that is something I do try to remind people of too, that I mean, we are human beings, and guess what? Human beings die. I mean, we none of us live forever. So, you go ahead and make all the plans you want to make as a married couple, but just know the chances of both of you holding hands, going off into the sunset, falling off the perch together at the same time is highly unlikely. Somebody's going to go before the other one, and that's just
mhm,
the way it is to be a human being. And so the sooner we can, you know, really get that in our brains, the better. Not that you're looking, thinking, oh, they're going to die, pass it. It's not that, but you just have to realize that's just part of that's part of the cycle of life, so.
Yes. And I mean, it makes me have a lump in my throat because it is the truth, but it's a very painful truth.
Yes, it
It's a
is.
painful truth. Well, I'm
Yes.
so grateful that you were able to join me today, Sister Copeland. You've been such a blessing just in the few weeks that we've been chatting back and forth. I value the words of wisdom that you have and just your contagious laugh and your stories, your little texts that you send, your video, or not your video messages, but your audio messages. They bring a smile to my face every time. So I would love to know, what are some final thoughts or words that you can end this podcast with?
Well, right now my heart is really full because I'm just looking back. Actually, while we're talking, I'm sitting here looking at a picture of me, my husband, and my boys when they were younger, and I just think, how could I ask for any more than, the most wonderful husband, so kind and fun and funny, and 4 sons and 4 daughters-in-law that are all living for God and loving God and serving Him. Um, I had someone ask me not that long ago, would I ever think about remarrying? And I said, I wasn't even thinking about an answer, just kind of popped out of my mouth. I said, why would I? Like, why would I? And I said, because I had a Rolls Royce. Why would I settle for a Chevy Chevette now? You know what I'm saying? I had I had the best. And now I'm just starting to be where the memories of my husband can bring a lot of joy. I still can't listen to his preaching. Like 30 seconds of his preaching tears me up and tears me up. So I can't do that yet. But I love to look at pictures of him now. It is really difficult for me to go to his grave side. I try to go, but I don't go that often. Because that tears me up. I can't find any peace or joy there. Now, a couple of my boys, they go there all the time, like, and it brings them a lot of peace to sit there and talk to Deb. But I don't. The first time I went, it was before we had the headstone and all this beautiful memorial now and everything. But when I first went, I went by myself, which my boys told me later I shouldn't have done that. I should have had them come, but. And it was just, a mound of dirt and a little placard there. And it was just starting to get dark. And I was just going to go and talk to him. And next thing I knew, I found myself, laid across the grave, sobbing, and just saying, just telling him how much I missed him and all that. And then inadvertently, I had laid down on a bed of red ants.
Oh, no.
and I came up off of that grave like you'd think the resurrection took place. It was like one moment I'm sobbing and the next moment I'm screaming, hollering, slapping at my legs. I had so many ants crawling on me. So some things can bring peace now that in the beginning are so painful.
Yes.
And so, but one thing I really, really, really miss with my husband is his laugh. And that's something I wish I had recorded. And if any of you are right now in the process, if you have somebody that's sick, I mean, it's awful to even talk about it like this, but if you have someone that, except for a miracle, may not make it, if you can, still try to record them talking and laughing, because somehow I lost when I switched iPhones. Usually every time everything's saved to the cloud, it's great. It goes right onto the new phone. When I got a new phone this time, I made sure everything was on the cloud, but my voicemails did not transfer and they were not able to retrieve them. And so I lost these amazing voicemails from my husband from years ago. And it just makes me sick every time I think about it, because now I would love to hear his laugh and I know it would bring me a lot of comfort. But anyway, back to the question, just knowing that God is in control, just like I said, I would say that, well, let me say this might make sense. About a year and a half ago, I had been wallowing in depression and sorrow, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I woke up one morning and I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to have to go on. I'm going to honor Tim by going on with my life. I felt like, and I don't think it's always like a clear cut timeline like that. Just like you said, I loved what you had to say about the timeline of our life and also of our grief. There's no timeline to our grief, but for me, it was like I woke up and I knew I had to, because it was becoming too comfortable to be in this cave of
Mm-hmm.
darkness. It was cozy and comfortable to just stay in bed and just, ignore people and ignore calls and all that. And I just said, I can't do it anymore. So I got up and started living my life. And about 2 weeks later, our church burnt down to the ground. Okay.
Yes.
You talk
Another
about grieving,
tragedy.
you talk about grief hitting you in the face all over again. No, it wasn't a person, but if a building could ever house, your emotions and
Mhm.
your joys and sorrow, I mean, it's our church, anybody's
Absolutely.
church that, yeah, absolutely. You understand what I'm talking about. And that was a building my husband, when we were down the road in a little rented building with 17 people in our church. That was the church my husband would go walk around over and over and claim it in Jesus' name and pray over it. And that was a church that I had just spent right before the fire over a year working on my husband's office, getting it fixed up like a museum with memorabilia and just precious stuff. But I remember standing out it was about 2 a.m., and there were several hundred of us strong standing in the bitter cold watching our church burn down to the ground.
Mhm.
All right. And
Yes.
I went to my eldest son, Jordan, who was the pastor, is the pastor. And I said, Jordan, of everything that we're losing right now, what are you thinking about right now? Because I knew what he's going to say. And he said, Dad's Bible. And I
Mhm.
said, that's exactly what I'm thinking about. I can let go of a lot of things, but to know that we are losing Daddy's Bible. And it was in a Bible case. A lot of people might remember back in the day. I'm talking about like back in the 70s and 80s. Most, any preacher worth his salt had one of these big, heavy leather
Mhm.
Bible covers with the lacing around the edges, and it usually had
Mhm.
the image of the praying hands carved into it and their name. I mean, they just,
Yes.
probably weighed about 20 pounds, and that's what it was. And that's what Jordan had. And I was like sick about it. And of course he was too. Well, a few days after the fire, we were in the back in the back of the church, because they were starting to try to clean things out, and just the ashes and rubble. It's unbelievable the things, that we lost, but
Mhm.
thank God we didn't lose any people. So I do have to remind myself of that. Anyway, my son Caleb brought out, covered with dust and gnarled and halfway melted, but brought out my husband's Bible, the only thing that
Wow.
survived in Jordan's office. Everything else is burnt to a crisp. You hear me?
Wow.
And that Bible made it. That
Thank you,
leather must have been
Jesus.
so thick. Yes, thank you, Jesus. And when I saw that, I mean, of course, I burst out crying, but I also just knew, I was like, I can make it through anything because God is letting me know, it's God, it's His word.
Mhm.
That's what keeps us going. And that, man, that helped me more than just about anything I can think of with the grief of losing our church after losing my husband. I just know, um, all you widows and widowers out there, or maybe somewhere down the road, you will be, well, you will be, unless the Lord tarries or whatever. Just remember it, these words, that God knows right where you're at, and He is going to make all things new. And just stay with Him, let His word dwell in you, and He's going to work miracles for you all along the way. And He loves us.
Amen. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Sister Copeland. Thank you for your
Thank
kind
you.
words. Thank you for bringing wisdom to us and laughter and another perspective. And I'm just so grateful that you agreed to be a part of this podcast, and just want to let you know that I admire you and I look up to you, and just love and appreciate you. So thank you for joining us today, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to The Business of Widows. If today's conversation brought you comfort, clarity, or hope, I invite you to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with another widow or widower who might need it. Remember, you are loved, you are seen, and you don't have to walk this road alone. Join me next time as we continue sharing real stories of grief, grace, and God's goodness, because healing is holy and hope is still alive.